Imagine the scene. It is September 1987 in the central sun-baked city of Goiânia, Brazil. The air is thick with tropical heat and the dusty scent of urban decay. Our main characters are Roberto dos Santos Alves and Wagner Mota Pereira. Visualize these men, two local scrap metal scavengers, impoverished, untrained, and looking for a mechanical payload inside a crumbling, abandoned medical clinic. They enter the ruins of the Instituto Goiano de Radioterapia, a building left behind by a bureaucratic failure of the owners and the state. In the shadows of a treatment room, they locate a heavy, metallic assembly, a teletherapy unit. They have zero technical knowledge of what sits inside the lead housing. The primary behavioral data point is a total lack of regulatory control. A highly lethal cesium-137 source has been left completely unguarded in an unmapped perimeter. The power dynamic shifts as the two men use basic hand tools to pry the rotating cylinder out of its iron cradle. They place the heavy object on a wheelbarrow and push it into the streets, unaware that they have just initiated an invisible process of molecular sabotage. The archive is open. The timeline of the worst civilian radiological deletion in the Southern Hemisphere begins with the scraping sound of a wheelbarrow on asphalt. Technical density expansion. The teletherapy unit was an international standard model manufactured in the 1970s, containing a compact capsule of cesium chloride with a radioactivity measurement of roughly 51 terabecquerels. The physical state of the cesium salt was highly soluble and dispersible, a technical hazard that turned the scrap metal theft into an immediate and active biological trap. The scavengers take the heavy assembly to Roberto's house, where they attempt to dismantle the thick lead shielding to extract what they believe is valuable scrap metal. For 3 days, they pound on the capsule with screwdrivers and hammers, a primitive mechanical attack against a nuclear containment barrier. By September 13th, the lead wall suffers a permanent fracture. Through the tiny opening, they see a strange, deep blue powder that glows in the dark. This is the phenomenon of Cherenkov radiation or radioluminescence, a sensory sabotage that mimics a magical artifact. Imagine the two men staring at the blue dust, completely fascinated by its luminosity. They touch it with their bare fingers, applying the radioactive salt directly to their skin. Within 48 hours, the biological response is immediate and severe. They begin vomiting, experiencing intense diarrhea, and their hands begin to swell. They misinterpret the symptoms as a localized tropical illness or bad food, completely unaware that their cells are being systematically shattered by ionizing radiation. The power dynamic between the invisible isotopes and human tissue is totally absolute, beginning the silent deletion of their internal organs. Technical density expansion. The blue glow was the result of the intense ionization of air molecules by high-energy beta particles emitted by the cesium-137 atoms. The contact with the bare skin delivered an immediate localized skin dose of over 10 grays, initiating acute radiation syndrome, ARS, and rapid necrosis of the epithelial cells long before any systemic data was captured by local clinics. On September 18th, Roberto decides to sell the remaining parts of the machine to a local junkyard owner named Dever Alves Ferreira. Imagine Dever entering the room, looking into the opened capsule, and falling under the same spell of the glowing blue powder. He thinks the material is supernatural or valuable, perhaps a component for a new type of jewelry. He moves the machine to his junkyard, a site that becomes the primary distribution hub for the contamination network. Dever invites friends, neighbors, and family members to view the glowing stone. Over 3 days, fragments of the cesium-137 capsule are distributed across the neighborhood like gifts. People carry the powder in their pockets, paint their skin with the blue dust, and eat their meals with contaminated hands. The behavioral trace shows a community completely integrated into a silent, radioactive cloud. The physical rastro of the cesium spreads through the soil, the water, and the skin of dozens of human components, creating a messy and unsolved epidemiological map across a 3-mile radius. Technical density expansion. Cesium-137 mimics potassium within the human body, meaning that once it is ingested through contaminated food or skin absorption, it is rapidly distributed through the muscular and nervous tissues. The half-life of the isotope is 30 years, ensuring that any unrecovered fragment would act as a permanent, localized environmental sabotage for decades if left unmanaged by specialized decontamination units. The most harrowing biological deletion in this dossier involved Dever's 6-year-old niece, Leda das Neves Ferreira. Imagine the little girl sitting on the floor of the junkyard, eating a sandwich after playing with the blue powder. Her hands are coated with the cesium-137 salt. As she eats, she ingests the particles, moving the radioactive source directly into her digestive tract. This is an internal catastrophe. The isotopes begin an unyielding, high-energy bombardment of her internal organs from centimeters away. Within days, her throat swells, her hair falls out, and her internal lining begins to hemorrhage. The clinical reconstruction of her state shows a child who has been transformed into a walking source of radiation. When her mother, Maria Gabriela, finally notices the sudden sickness of her family, she packs the remaining parts of the capsule into a plastic bag, boards a crowded public bus, and takes it to a regional public health office. This is a desperate behavioral movement that spreads the contamination trail across the city's public transit grid, turning the bag into an active, moving weapon. Technical density expansion. Leda das Neves received an estimated internal and external dose of 6 grays, a lethal concentration for a pediatric subject. The internal emission of gamma rays from the ingested cesium chloride caused a total collapse of her bone marrow within 96 hours, eliminating her body's capacity to manufacture white blood cells and leaving her immune system completely deleted. On September 28th, a local medical physicist named Walter Mendez arrives at the public health office with a standard scintillation counter. As he approaches the building, the instrument's needle pins to the maximum limit instantly. He believes the machine is broken, a mechanical failure of the detector. He replaces the unit with a secondary meter, but the results are identical. This is the moment of technical realization. The city of Goiânia is facing an unprecedented radiological emergency. The local authorities initiate a total, secret quarantine protocol. The state-of-the-art diagnostic teams from the National Nuclear Energy Commission (CNEN) are deployed, setting up a temporary triage unit inside a sports stadium. Imagine thousands of terrified citizens lining up in the sun, waiting for a technician with a Geiger counter to scan their skin. The intense expressions of the scientists reflect the scale of the disaster. Over 240 people are found to have high levels of external or internal contamination. The stadium becomes a field of exclusion, separating the radioactive individuals from the clean population. Technical density expansion. The initial scanning utilized an uncalibrated monitor that suffered from saturation due to the extreme ambient radiation fields, requiring a rapid shift to high-range ionization chambers. The triage identified 20 individuals requiring immediate hospitalization inside isolated wards equipped with reverse laminar airflows to protect their damaged immune systems from secondary infections. The severe treatment of the highly contaminated victims begins inside the Marcílio Dias Naval Hospital in Rio de Janeiro. The biological facts are immutable. For individuals, Leda das Neves, her Aunt Maria Gabriela, and 2 young junkyard employees have passed the point of cellular recovery. Imagine the medical teams using experimental bone marrow stimulants to save the child, but the internal damage is too extensive. On October 23rd, Leda das Neves Ferreira becomes the first fatality of the Goiânia dossier. Her funeral in Rio is met with a violent social sabotage. A crowd of protesters, fearing the contamination of the local soil, hurls stones and bricks at her lead-lined coffin. This is a dark behavioral manifestation of public panic. The 4 victims are buried in specialized graves, encased in tons of solid concrete to ensure that their biological remains do not leak cesium into the water table. The power dynamic between the state's nuclear management and human grief ends in a concrete vault. Technical density expansion. The death of the victims was attributed to generalized sepsis and internal hemorrhaging brought on by total bone marrow aplasia. The lead-line coffins were engineered to withstand a pressure of 100 atmospheres and featured a thickness of 2 inches of lead shielding to completely attenuate the persistent gamma rays emitted by the bones of the deceased. The physical cleanup of Goiânia was an operation of total architectural and environmental demolition. The government established an exclusion zone around the junkyard and the affected homes. Teams dressed in protective white suits systematically dismantled 7 houses, scraping the topsoil down to a depth of 6 inches and cutting down contaminated trees. Imagine the scene as family photos. Furniture, cars, and brick walls are crushed and packed into specialized metal drums. This is a total atmospheric and historical deletion of a neighborhood. The process manufactured over 3,000 cubic meters of radioactive waste. This waste was transported under armed military escort to a permanent storage facility in Abadia de Goiás, where it was buried inside massive concrete trenches. The rastro of the cesium was erased from the city blocks, but it remains locked inside these tombs, a mechanical monument to a scrap metal theft that cost millions of dollars and shattered the history of a community. Technical density expansion. The decontamination dragnet utilized chemical stripping agents like Prussian blue to bind with the cesium ions on porous surfaces, preventing the aerosolization of the salt. The volume of radioactive waste generated was classified as low to medium level, stored inside 70-ton concrete containers designed to maintain structural integrity for 300 years, exceeding the 10 half-life requirement for the total decay of the cesium-137 isotope. The final minute-by-minute forensic reconstruction of Dossier 29 ends here. 4 lives deleted, hundreds contaminated, an entire neighborhood dismantled by the silent energy of an abandoned medical device. The trace left by the Goiânia incident is a severe lesson in the critical necessity of strict regulatory chains for hazardous materials. The biological facts are immutable: a capsule breached by a hammer, a child who glowed in the dark, and a city that had to be scraped clean to survive. The radioactive room remains the definitive case study in civilian radiological accidents and the challenges of large-scale urban decontamination. Your mind is the final piece of this investigation. Join our community of investigators by clicking the subscribe button. Help us track the traces that the modern world leaves behind its locked clinic doors. I am your guide through the darkness, and I will return with a new dossier very soon. Keep your mind sharp. Focus on the facts with your eyes closed. And remember, the most dangerous threats are often invisible, and every evidence counts. This is Mind 74, and we are the keepers of the cold files. The investigation is suspended, but the file remains open. Until next time. Technical density expansion. The Goiânia accident resulted in a total overhaul of the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA) tracking protocols for orphan sources, establishing the mandatory cradle-to-grave digital registration system used today. The medical data collected from the survivors remains a core reference text in radiation victimology and the study of long-term cytogenetic damage in human populations exposed to continuous low-dose internal emitters.